Words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be ever acceptable unto thee, who is our God and our Redeemer. You know, sometimes when we listen to stories about Mary, in some traditions we get an idea of somebody who was fairly meek and mild. But that isn't really the biblical Mary. See, she was really quite a feisty lady. She was, we are told, first of all, remember last week when Zechariah was told that there was an angel there, and what was his response? He was scared to death. She's just mildly perplexed. What's this thing? Like, she doesn't get scared to death at the idea of a heavenly messenger. She just says, mild perplexity. Why are they here? But then we are told so much about Mary as the days go on. First of all, she goes off on a travel by herself. Now, she's a young woman, engaged to be married, and she goes off traveling by herself. I hate to tell you, that was not normal in those days. But she doesn't think twice about it. She's going to go visit her cousin because she's pregnant. And, you know, the two of them might as well do their pregnancy together. Have you ever watched young women do pregnancy together? It's a joy, isn't it? To watch people share the joy. And she goes off. But she, we are told, has been chosen by God for a reason, right? She's not chosen just because she happens to be available. Rather, we are told that God has chosen her because of who she is. So who is she that God would choose her? Well, what we are told about who she is she has a plan for the child she's going to give birth to, right? And that plan is laid out in the Magnificat. In the Magnificat, she says, I am going to have a child who's going to bring peace and justice to the people. Now, I hate to tell you, but when I was going to have a child, that was not my plan. Okay? Maybe get him through college was my plan. Right? People have plans for children. Think about what your plan was for your child or your children when you were thinking about having a child or had a child. What were your plans? You know, we're told that in certain cultural groups, the plan is very clearly that they will be the top of their class. And those families do everything in their power to make sure that those children excel academically. We have other families that we know have plans for their children in terms of the fact that they will go into the career that their fathers are in or their parents are in. They have plans for their children and they nurture those plans for their children, right? Mary likewise had a plan for her child, but it was a little grander. The plan for her child was that her child would bring the people out of a time of being ruled by others. He would bring peace. He would bring justice to the people, to the least of these. He would make sure that nobody went hungry. He would heal the sick. That's all in the Magnificat, folks. That's quite a plan, isn't it? Maybe we should dream a little bigger. What happens when we have a plan? When we really have a vision of where we want to get and we have a plan, we are much more likely to get there, aren't we? Often, when we don't have a plan, we don't get anywhere. When was the last time you made a plan for your future? When you had a clear goal and made a plan. You see, part of the Christmas story is getting ready for the future we want. We're about to enter a new decade. A new decade. So when 2030 comes, what do you want your life to look like? What's the plan? What's the plan for St. John's to get to 2030? Do we have a plan? Or do we think that if we just lolly-doll along, it will happen? Is our plan as great as Mary's about bringing justice and peace and hope to the world? Mary's one person. She thinks she can do all that. Are we a little bigger than one person?
Yes.
Can we bring justice and peace to the world? Is that a way to be church? Can we have an image of what we want to create in the world that's as great as Mary's? One way to walk through the Christmas season is to see what the hope is. To see that plan for the future that Mary puts out there, and to know that we can bring about that kind of peace and justice too. We are blessed by being a community. We don't have to do it alone. Mary, you know, she kind of had to do it alone. She was a bit of an adventurer. Think about all the places Mary travels in our Bible that we know of. She travels to see Elizabeth by herself. She and Joseph travel to Bethlehem when she's just about to give birth. Not exactly the time you want to be away from your support system. They take off to Egypt, right? Come back from Egypt. That's a lot of traveling in those days. What can you do? If this one woman could do all that, how do you think you've been chosen? What has God put in your heart about how you bring about the peace and the justice that God calls for? We all have our small part to do. And then as community, we can do a much bigger piece. Sometimes Advent is a really hard time. Not only is it hard for people who are grieving to be in the midst of celebration, or people who are having a hard time to be in the midst of all the celebration that comes as we get near Christmas, but it's also hard because it's darker outside, because it's a time when the land is resting. And as we sit in this time, it is a good time to look within ourselves. And sometimes we don't like looking within ourselves. That's a truth. Because when we look inside ourselves and we hear what God is calling us to, we often are called to bigger things than we necessarily want to do. How many of you, at the point that you thought about retirement, thought, I'm going to go travel. I'm going to relax. God is going to be good to me, and I am going to have relaxation. Bad news for you, there is no retirement in the Bible. People do not retire. They work for God until their last day. You might retire from a profession, but you don't get to retire from Christianity. As Christians, we work for peace, for justice, for hope for others. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of ways we do that. In this church, we have been working with OR and helping people who are felons to have hope, to have Christmas. Other times, we have done things with other groups, with Caritas, for people who are homeless. We find different ways to touch people's lives. And sometimes those things feel very small. But they make a huge difference. The Poor People's Campaign, and some of you have heard about that before, one of the things that we're getting ready for is something in June. Why do we have to get ready now for June, right? In June, there's going to be a march to give power and speech to those who are disenfranchised. A coalition march. But here's the huge piece, okay? And this is why we have to work now for it, okay? I can get to DC, right? I can find a way to get myself to DC, no problem. But the homeless who live in Richmond do not have capacity to go for a march. They don't have capacity to pay for a bus fare for the day, to go up and have food up there and come back. That is not within their capacity. And for this march, we are giving them the capacity to speak for themselves. We'll go with them and accompany them. You heard that word from me before, accompany. We'll go with them and accompany them, but we are allowing them, the disenfranchised, to be at this march. And that means raising money, getting buses, doing all sorts of things from all over Virginia, so that those who need to be able to speak for themselves can speak. Think about how empowering it has been for you when you have been able to speak up for yourself. Think about how that has given you times an ability to see the future in a different way because you could speak for yourself instead of having other people speak for you. Think about what a gift it is to allow other people to speak for themselves. And so that's a small thing, right? To make sure that people can get to a place where they can speak out for themselves. That's not a huge project, right? That's a small project. But it gives hope. One of our words for Advent. It helps bring peace to people's spirits, that they're able to speak up for themselves. That's what it means as a congregation. In the Congregation of Poor People, that's how they're working on their peace and justice. But we have to figure out how we're called to work for peace and justice as St. John's. We love each other's company. We have a very good time here. We enjoy one another. we don't do a very good job of getting outside the door sometimes. Of making sure that other people know that they can come be part. We don't always do a very good job of saying, you're part of us. And we got work to do and we need you. Because we got work to do. In some way, God is calling us to be part of that peace and justice, just like Mary. And like Mary, we have to have a vision of what we're creating. I sometimes laughingly say that Jesus was a good Jewish boy. He did what his mother told him. But if you read the Magnificat, and the Magnificat, you got to understand, is part of the introduction, right, to the Gospel of Luke. Okay? Remember, Mary's story is only told in Luke. If you read Matthew, you're going to get Joseph's story. If you read Luke, you get Mary's story. Okay? You only get Mary's story in Luke. Okay? But if you read the story, there's a plan. There's an amazing plan for the child she's going to give birth to. If you read Matthew, there's not so much of a plan. But Mary's clear. I'm giving birth to a child that will bring peace and justice to the world. What are you giving birth to this season? Amen.